are the projects you have planned for DC?
Well, there's a book that I've just been talking to Dick Giordano about, and it's called Watchmen. And what we want to do is to actually examine the implications of the superhero if these absurd characters were real, just what they'd do to the world. In that, if there had been a Superman ever, the world would be unrecognisable. Because, well, if you've got a character of Superman's level and power working for the Americans, then what would American foreign policy be like? I should imagine it would perhaps be a little bit more adventurous than it is at present, and I should imagine that Russian foreign policy would be a little less adventurous than it is at present, and you'd have a very different world situation. So we want to play around with that angle of it. We want to try and examine some of the things that really would happen if there were superheroes. And that's not something that you can do in the actual DC universe without closing down half the books. You know, so we're just going to do a little story that's totally separate from the rest of the DC continuity, just about all these strange, obsessed super characters in a very, very bleak, grim world. And we examine the political aspect and we examine the social aspect, and yeah, we've got a few interesting things coming up, and I'm really looking forward to getting into that one.
How did Alan come to do Swamp Thing?
Sort of by accident. He had never done any work for the American comics. He was very prominent in the British comic magazines. They publish those things weekly over there as opposed to the way we publish them here. There are things like 2000 AD in particular is a science fiction superhero weekly comic magazine. And I have friends in England. I was over there visiting, and they sometimes send me magazines. And I found his work in those magazines and fell in love with it. I said, boy, he's the guy for the book, when I needed a replacement for the previous writer.
Len rang me up just one night. I thought it was one of my friends playing a practical joke and putting on a funny American accent, you know, and but no, it was the real Len Wein, and he said, would you like to write Swamp Thing? And, you know, when I'd picked myself up off the floor, I said, yes, yeah, I could just about manage that. And
yeah, I called from the office one day at about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, which meant it was probably 10 or 11 at night, you know. And I get this phone call from some strange American going, hello, Alan, and yes, this is Len Wein calling from DC Comics, and was this long pause. Really? Yes, and we started talking, and I explained what I was interested in, and it turned out he was a big Swamp Thing fan.
Len was the guy who created the character, and Len was my editor, which made me feel a little bit nervous in that I was suggesting all these sweeping changes in the character to the guy who'd invented it. But Len was very supportive, and he just said, yeah, go ahead, this sounds good. Which I wasn't expecting, but I was very gratified to get that sort of treatment. You know, it was lovely.
Did you read the interview that I did with Len? You'll have to read it. I asked him about the Swamp Thing, and he said, well, I must say that although I enjoy it, it was probably one of my favorite books to write, I'm glad Alan Moore's doing it now because his work on it dwarfs my own.
That's nice. I mean, a bit embarrassing. I mean, I've got the greatest respect for Len's writing, and sort of, I wish he wouldn't say these things. I mean, it's very nice, but that gives me quite a lot to live up to. You know, I think I'd rather play it quiet and sort of, you know, take it at its own speed. But yeah, I mean, that's great that Len and the people at DC have been giving me such a lot of support, because I've been doing some outrageous things that I didn't really expect to get away with, you know, and I found that DC have been more than prepared to indulge my most insane whims.